All right, let's go ahead and do it, mate. So, thank you everybody for joining us. And so, I'll first off introduce Eirinn. Eirinn, how do you spell your name?
Oh, Eirinn.
Cool. Something that spell check does not believe in, but it is what it is. So, no matter how many times I tried to spell Eirinn's name the right way, it always told me it was wrong. So that's a lifetime of how Eirinn deals with trying to write her own name. So thanks, as I said, thanks for joining us. We'll get started a little bit just by Eirinn telling us a little bit about who she is and why we got you on today. Quick 30-second turnaround, and then we'll jump right into the meat and potatoes of it, Eirinn.
All right. I think of myself as a strength coach, but all around really a wellness coach. I'm precision nutrition certified, just like you, Jay. I have my BS in health and exercise science, so I've been coaching since I graduated college. I've coached mostly in private sector, similar to like what Ethos does, and now my husband and I run our own gym here in Raleigh.
Cool. I'll definitely try and add some links to the Movement Lab, which is Eirinn and John's gym in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yep.
Perfect. I'm not great with American geography, but it is what it is. I don't think most Americans are great with American geography, so I guess I fit right in. Thanks very much for that. We'll jump straight into our first topic. So the goals for today, as always for the workshop, are to understand a little bit about your most challenging nutritional hurdles. Categorize these issues either as nutritional or habitual. I think oftentimes there's a big crossover between those, but I think a lot of what we'll talk about today will be more habitual, more of the way we think of food rather than the nitty-gritty kind of, the more science-based stuff. And ultimately, the science-based stuff, in our opinion, I think for the vast majority of it, nutrition science hasn't really changed and likely isn't to change too much over the next handful of years, let's say. But the way we interact with food in our environments, our habits, the way we think of food, the almost emotional concepts around food are constantly varying. And a big portion of why I wanted to make sure that we got somebody else on today, and specifically Eirinn, to talk about it, is because I think Eirinn has a very good way of kind of framing how we look at food. I always really enjoy, I always say to her, I always enjoy a good Eirinn nutritional rant on Instagram, or just the way that she poses it. I think personally I come from a more, I probably just am more drawn to the rules side of things, but I know that isn't the only way of thinking of it. So to have Eirinn on, hopefully, will give us a great, slightly different perspective of the way of thinking of these things. So most of what we'll talk about today will be habitual around our nutrition, and then hopefully we can have some actionable takeaways to feel like we can make some manageable changes, or even just some manageable thought changes as we go through this. So this week's topics, we're going to go through a little bit of the media portrayal of body image and body shape preferences. And if that sounds like a lot to unpack, we'll do our very best to unpack it in a manageable way. The good and the bad of diet culture. So what diet culture is, how we all think of diet culture, and ways that it can benefit us, and the large number of ways that can maybe kind of skew our vision of nutrition, and then thinking about different approaches for different people towards nutrition, and how we ultimately just try and fit good nutrition or efficient nutrition in our lifestyle, right? So we'll jump straight into it. Media portrayal of body image and body shape, or body preferences. So I'm going to ask Eirinn a good amount of questions today, because I think you probably have all heard my rambling nonsense on my opinions of these things. Eirinn, tell me a little bit about kind of your approach to how you work with your clients, and how you might, what you might run into a little bit with the way they think of how their body should look, or the things that they should be eating.
So it's interesting, right? Because whatever is in at the moment, the media is going to try and market something, usually a diet, but sometimes products as well for that diet, supplements, etc., to us to get that body shape that's in. And I'm 30, so I remember when really stick thin was in, and now like thick with 2 C's is in, and people want a bigger butt, right? Like it's all about the glute building, and so whatever is in is going to be marketed to us, and whatever we're seeing and we're taking in is going to affect us no matter how seasoned you are in taking in that information and absorbing it and not letting it affect your beliefs about yourself. So my clients are normal people just like me, and they're affected by those things, and they're like, okay, well, I saw this thing on TV and I think that this is the best way to get XYZ to my goals. And I think it's really important to kind of unpack that. Like, why do you believe that? Where is that information coming from? Do you think that that's a good resource to get information for? And is it going to work for you? That's the biggest thing about nutrition, right? Like, if it doesn't work for you, it's probably not going to work long term. So we're all affected by the media, but but we can only do what we can do. Like, how much of it are you consuming? How much of it do you go looking for versus is just kind of around you? Someone's talking about it, et cetera, et cetera. But my job, I think, is to ask them a lot of questions and kind of help them understand, is that serving them, that media portrayal of whatever is in, and is there a way to let it go?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And so, like, I was reading our notes kind of back and forth before this, and I thought there was an interesting point that you made in there, which is like, you know, we as fitness professionals are surrounded by the things that we ultimately always cultivate our own culture. So like we surround our things with the things that either we're interested in, or we at least choose the things that we absorb, right? And just as is choosing the things that we eat a diet, also just choosing the things that we consume around us, the media, you know, the things that we believe, the things that we read, the news that we watch, the magazines that we read, the people we follow on Instagram, that's also all a diet, right? It is something that we're consuming. It's what contributes to our kind of ourself as a whole, and it fills a gap. Something I read the other day, which was really kind of an interesting thought, which was like, culture will happen around you whether you want it to or not. So you may as well be part of it, right? You may as well cultivate it and choose it as to what you want to absorb, because if you don't, things are around you and they're gonna take up space for you anyway. So, you know, being an active part versus being a passive part of what we consume from the media, I think is, you know, how we think of nutrition or how we think of anything that helps us develop an opinion is obviously important.
Yeah, something
does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Something you had said to me when you asked me to do this with you last week. I had gone on one of my very common nutrition rants, right? And something I stated in there was that I don't get advertisements on any of my social platforms for supplements or diets or things like that, which is interesting because I'm in the field, right? I talk about nutrition a lot. I follow a lot of people in the food world, whether it's on the cooking side or the food science side. But because I choose who to follow and what kind of information they're putting out, I'm not getting any sort of supplements or crazy diet advertised or marketed towards me. And a lot of the times, the first time I hear about this new cool thing is through a client being like, well, what do you think about that? And I'm like, I don't know anything about that, but I probably don't have a good opinion about it.
Yeah. I think anything packaged as, it's almost like, right, obviously I think nutrition comes across as a fashion, like it's, you know, mom jeans were in the 80s and now for somehow, you know, they're back. Denim jackets were in the 70s and now somehow they're back. Like, there's nothing new. They're just being repackaged and repopularized. And that's what I meant about right at the start of this was like, you know, nutrition, what we know about nutrition science ultimately hasn't changed or developed too much. We're making little sprinklings, little 0.5% changes or 0.5% kind of gains of knowledge more and more and more in the field. But what we know about, you know, meat and potatoes, 8 hours sleep and general movement and resistance training and those kind of things, like those things have been around for a long time, and if it seems too good to be true, it's ultimately probably too good to be true. And it's not, there is nothing new, and if it gets packaged to us as new, my goal is not to be super cynical. I think I probably lean that way anyway, but to definitely question it, you know, to go back to something you said before, which is like, why do I believe that? what makes me believe that? Where did that belief come from? Did I generate it myself? Is it something I generated when I was 15 and now I'm 30, and does it serve me anymore? Because behaviors are going to change over time, and just as our environments change over time, like, our behaviors have to kind of adapt with it.
And knowing your behaviors and understanding your behaviors and where they come from and how to change them, I would argue is so much more important in terms of nutrition and your habits around your diet than knowing the latest food science.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, like you said, it hasn't changed that much, and the small percentage that it's going to change isn't really going to affect you and your success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? It's the things that we can see. It's, the things that we learn, the new stuff that we learn seems sexy. And I think, maybe we're packaged, especially since we live in the US, we're packaged this kind of Cinderella story of like this immediate change overnight and this not quick fix, but this quick, rise, this transcendent rise to success. And we're kind of packaged that in a way that and that's ultimately how we're packaged most things, not just food, but like career changes and learning and gains in the gym, all those things. So much so that it becomes an expectation about how maybe we look, or a framework, how maybe we look at literally everything. And that includes nutrition. So yeah, I think that's obviously, I think all of those are very good points. Something I wanted to, and I wrote in the notes here, something I wanted to kind of get your opinion on is, I hate using acronyms because acronyms are basically a culprit of exactly what we were just talking about, right? Which is the haze movement of the health at every size movement. And I guess we kind of see, and I'm not a big proponent of consuming this too much, but I think probably the most recent kind of fallout of things was the musician Adele has just lost a ton of weight, and there's a lot of either support. It seems to be pretty polarizing. I think before that was probably Lizzo. Lizzo was pictured in a sports bra riding a bike here and there, and don't worry about it, Joe Riley, one of our coaches, has just joined. He literally just popped it on my screen. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in the general kind of media sphere about how healthy bodies are supposed to look, and the health at every size kind of movement is doing its very best to try to climb the ladder and not debunk necessarily, but give some alternative thought processes around that. How do you feel about those things?
So I think you made some really good points in what we had previously talked about before we hopped on here. Healthy behaviors can happen at any size, and I think it's not safe to assume that you know how healthy someone is based on the way that they look. For instance, like with Adele losing a lot of weight, I see a lot of folks talking about like she could have done that in any sort of way, and they might not have been healthy, but we have this tendency to praise people when they lose weight, like, oh, you look great, but we don't actually know what's going on in their life or why they lost weight or how they lost weight. And we give them all that sort of praise, and then they start to identify, well, people like me and they recognize me and they see me when I'm this size, right? But they didn't see me in that same way when I was heavier. So it's a tricky topic to talk about, and I think that it's more important to focus on behaviors than it is to focus on body size and to glorify one type of body. Our genetics are going to play a huge role into how we look. So are our behaviors over time. And what I'd like to see is more talk around like what these folks are doing and if they're happy. Not like some crazy, like I worked out 2 hours a day to get this body. And unfortunately, a lot of people, I mean, celebrities are held to a different standard than normal people, right? And then they talk about what they're doing to get the way they look, and people think, oh, well, I have to do that too, because that's what Adele did, or Beyonce said that in her Netflix special, or, and I think it's a hard comparison to make. But health at every size, I like to see our fitness space be more inclusive and less intimidating to folks who maybe don't look like you and me. So I think it's an important movement that's going on.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's it goes back to the ideas of like the concepts that we already think of, or the beliefs that we already have. Like, do they necessarily serve us? And if we've been holding on to this belief system for a long, long time, and because there's a ton of people who, will go on and do the Wolverine workout, and if after 6 weeks they don't look like Hugh Jackman, they think they're Wolverine. Like, is there something, like, is there something inherently broken about me? Like, am I guess there's kind of two camps, there's ways that you can go. Like, if right in the middle is, hey, I'm going to try this workout that Hugh Jackman did to get, I don't know why I'm fixated on Wolverine, but I think it was maybe because I read it in a Men's Health one time. But and maybe it sticks in my head because I was like, well, I could do that. I could definitely do that workout for 6 weeks, and maybe I could look like that by the end of those 6 weeks. So a side note is I think we're probably all susceptible to this, whether we're in the industry or not. Is that, like, I think it's important to have some self-reflection, like you said earlier on, of like to recognize, do these behaviors serve me? Do I feel like I'm getting anything out of or am I getting much positive out of my efforts? And if I follow this workout for 8 weeks and I don't look like Hugh Jackman, the whole idea of putting all of my eggs in the one basket that says I'm not good enough, like I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I didn't get the results that he got, that's such an extreme approach that it's maybe not an approach we would have in any other walk of life, any other way of thinking of things, right? You don't get to I think there's actually a smart guy once told me this is your husband, like, you don't get to go to Harvard and graduate for, day one. Like, that's not the way it works. Like, we have to put in some more effort, and we have to kind of work out things that, spend some time working out characteristics or behaviors or changes that work for us. And over time, maybe we'll get a little bit closer to graduating, but it is a process. But again, I think it comes back to like how we're packaged with either good or bad, success or failure, and that it's not as polarized as that. That's ultimately not the way, it's definitely not the way bodies work, or it's definitely not the way that they look. You said right at the start, it's like everybody's body's going to look a little bit different right from the get-go. So, we're all starting from different places as well. So I think, the more it's crammed down our throat by the media, the more we feel like we have to believe that. And I agree with you that the every size movement is incredibly important. It's not saying that there aren't there are risk factors to being extremely overweight. Like, I think that people who are 300 pounds, they're very likely to know that there are risk factors to being 300 pounds. But if there's a habitual change and a recognition that they're working towards being a better version or working towards a more positive change, then great. But they don't have to look like me or you in order to be quote unquote a success or working towards something that's positive in terms of change.
And it doesn't mean that they won't see it doesn't mean that healthy behaviors, if they're not necessarily, weight loss takes time, we know that, and changing behaviors takes time. So it doesn't mean that they won't reap benefits from establishing those healthy behaviors other than weight loss. Like, weight loss is not the only goal when we try and change our habits. The only other thing I want to add to this is that we are really obsessed with what people do to look a certain way, especially celebrities in the media, whether it be Adele or the Wolverine thing, and I just want to challenge, like, all of us, ourselves included, because we've said, like, we've been susceptible to it as well. What makes that person an expert in what's going to work for you or I, or even an expert in the field? Like, who's giving that information to us? And is it kind of irresponsible to say, well, this is what Hugh Jackman did and you should do it too? Like,
yeah, I think so. I guess it's like the sentence structure should maybe end halfway through, which is, this is what I did. The end. It shouldn't say, this is what I did, you should do this too, because you should do this too, leads us into believing that I'm a human, he's a human, we're the same thing, let's go, we can do the same thing, get the same results, right? We understand how the mechanisms work, but there's so many more things that go into making him that way, or me this way, or you this way. Like, there's so many more things that give us so many more other environmental factors, just environmental factors alone in our current moment, not just what we've done in the past and how we think about things and our genetics and, how we were brought up, all those other things that go into it. So yeah, it's such a surface level way of looking at things, and we look at it as like a 6-week transformation. It's just like, I'm trying to come up with an interesting analogy here, but yeah, if we think about it, it just doesn't happen in any other walk of life. It just doesn't happen in any other way of thinking. But for some reason, health and fitness and the way we're told to look and feel seems to be different in that respect. So it's important that, as you said, to use the word like to challenge how we think of ourselves and how we see ourselves in that respect. So all right, I think let's move on to the second one, and I guess it's like I tried to write these questions in a way that they flowed relatively well. So like the good and the bad of diet culture, I think, is just an extension of the conversation we're having here, which is like, I wrote here and I was thinking about it and I've thought about it before, but like the word diet is like been made to look like a bit of a dirty word. The word diet as a definition, when we actually think about it and we strip it back and we try and take away some of our own preconceptions or maybe misconceptions about it, is the word diet means the kinds of food that a person, animal, or community habitually eats. That is our diet, right? So if we think about, let's go 50 years ago, like the diet that somebody ate in the north of England 50 years ago, that's all that means. It's that what they consumed at the time. Like a diet doesn't necessarily mean that we have to A, change, B, be bad or good, or that we have to cut out particular types of food, or that we have to only eat particular types of food. Like I think there's everybody has their own definition of what the word diet means. And I think oftentimes it's bastardized in a way that like it has to be negative. And it really is just a word. It's just a word that we used, and maybe we can like try and break some of our own stigma around it, was my original thought process for this. So like, we work with people every day in some respect or another, whether it's through training, whether it's through, one-on-one nutrition coaching, whether it's through, conversations we have on Instagram, about trying to help them improve their quote-unquote diet. And I think diet culture in general, it's something that's been kind of twisted for us in the mainstream, and it doesn't need to be that way. I think the important thing to have the conversation around is like, what we eat is important. The end. Mm-hmm. Now what we put into defining that word diet is something else, right? If you're on a diet, you don't have to feel embarrassed about, hey, this is what my diet looks like, or this is the way I eat, or you don't have to be shameful about it, or you don't have to also be really outgoing and tell everybody about how you eat. The word diet just means the foods that we consume. So that's always how I really look at it, I think.
I think that's a really good way to put it. When you first asked me about like diet culture, diet good versus bad, and I just saw the skeleton of your notes, I was like, oh gosh, I don't really have anything good to say. Like I've got a lot of bad stuff to say about diet culture. But then when you broke it down that way, I was like, okay, and this is what I'm all about, like reshaping the way we think about things, including myself. And if we rewrite how we think about diets and what we think about diets, then it isn't so polarizing, and it isn't so scary, like, oh, I have to give up all these things and I have to go on a diet. No, you have a diet already, right? But we do, even myself, have all these preconceived notions about diets and diet culture. And I think that we see a lot of the same stuff in even experienced clients. I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel like I see a lot of the same hang-ups, if you will, in folks, including myself, like, around what they think about food and the way that they think about food. And a lot of that is, what we've consumed recently and the way that we've been brought up to think about it. Your family influences you. All sorts of things influence you in the way that you think about this. But what I see a lot of is like associating morality with the way that you eat. Like a lot of people will come into a session with me and be like, oh, I was really bad last night. And I'm like, were you? What'd you do? Like, did you commit a crime? Like, no, they just had like a hamburger and a beer. I'm like, seems fine to me. Like, there's nothing bad about that. So like taking away morality from food and like how good of a person you are because of the way that you eat. I think a lot of the other stuff we see or I see are eating a certain type of way, like I have to eat this at this time of day, or I have to eat this food, cooked this type of way. And when you start getting people thinking like, oh, I could add vegetables to that. I never thought of that, and it didn't taste as bad as I thought it would. Or they think like, I need to run to lose weight. That's one I get a lot of. Like, that's the only way. I got to run to lose weight. So I think, again, it's just looking at diet as just a word, and then whatever way you want to shape it for your life is going to be important, and letting go of all the other stuff that you think you're supposed to think about it.
Right. Taking somebody else's definition of diet and trying to apply it to you is probably a fruitless endeavor. But if you just take diet as a bucket and then you put into it what you feel like serves you best, then your diet, when you describe it to other people, doesn't have to be, oh, I'm on a diet, I'm doing the no carb thing, I'm doing the high fat thing, I'm doing the bulletproof thing. Like, it doesn't have to be what other people conceive or what other people have a conception of as like diet, right? Because what they have, also as a side note, whatever preconception they have as the word diet doesn't really matter to you too much. Like, you consume what you consume, but thinking of the word diet as a bucket and then choosing what you put into it is a great way to like take all the things that we know, all the things that serve us well. Like, again, there's some things that we know that aren't, I say they're less up for debate, but like, we know that if we could eat a few more vegetables and a few less cheesy snacks, we'd probably be in a better place. But like, how we choose to do that and what we choose to kind of fill our bucket with, the diet bucket with, is ultimately like it's a very specific and individualized approach. I wrote in my notes, like, right now I'm working with 3 different people. One of them who is like super data driven, and he's very like, he responds really well to like, or almost kind of a little bit more rigidity. There's another person I'm working with that maybe needs a little bit more flexibility because there's a lot of things up in the air for her. And then another person I'm working with who's like quite new to this, and we're more just breaking down preconceptions like, if I'm going to have eggs, I can only have eggs when they're scrambled, and I can only have them for breakfast. Like, all right, like, why is that the case, right? Why do we feel like we have to do that? So 3 different people with 3 different approaches, all of which are kind of working off the same principles of the scientific approach to the meat and potatoes approach to energy balance and all the other things that we know, but we don't need to get hung up on that. We're more so like, the challenge is to just say, okay, this is what we know. How do we fit it into the fabric of your day to day? Looking at your notes here, I was going through before, and I hope you don't mind, but I highlighted something that you'd said, and it was the word adaptable, and I put it in bold and I highlighted it, and like the word adaptable here is like something that I think that, some people do really well with rules, and diet culture in general is something that's like, it forces us to think in a pretty strict way, and we as human beings like respond quite well to parameters, but we can get not obsessed, but yeah, we can probably get a bit more obsessed with those rules, and then I think they fix our way of thinking about this is the only way to eat, versus just saying like, during this principle, this is how this thing is asking me to eat. But the lack of adaptability and the lack of flexibility, like, if you're not flexible, what happens when you press on the barriers that aren't flexible? They break and they spill over, right? But if it has the ability to adapt and kind of ebb and flow, and like, you can be flexible with how you think about food, you're far less likely to spiral, and you're far less likely to quote unquote fall off the wagon if you have some of that adaptability. And I think a lot of that comes down to what you said before, which is like challenging your own individual notions of how you can, what diet means to you and how you think about food.
I think, and going back to what you said about your 3 different clients and your 3 different approaches, I just want to touch on that again. I think that that's so important. It sounds like they all know themselves, and they're approaching this based on what they know about themselves. And doesn't that sound like a much better way? Like, if we're all like, oh, well, rather than diet culture that makes us believe there is the way to do it, and if we don't do it the way, then we're wrong, right? Or something about us is wrong, or we're not going to be able to get to that goal because we're not able to do the thing that diet culture wants us to do. That's not appealing to me at all. And when you frame it for your clients, like, well, wouldn't you rather do it your way? Like, a way that we can still make it work 100%, but it'll suit you better.
Yeah.
And I bet those 3 clients that you're working with are all having a lot more success than if they were to follow some sort of guidelines or rules that somebody else has written up and say, here, this worked for me, so you do it.
Because I guess the challenge that I've seen there is that, like, because I think there's a dichotomy in my head, at least as the coach, is like, so I might approach it and think one day and think, maybe I'll give them a little bit more of a strict guideline to follow, or maybe I'll be a little bit looser with them, around this strict guideline. But the ultimately, that you're right, like the choice, the opportunity for them to choose what level of I say strictness, but like, let's look at choices on a spectrum. The opportunity for somebody to choose what level, what degree of specificity or degree of extremeness that they want to take on any given choice is ultimately up to them, and it can ebb and flow on a week-to-week basis. Like if I've got a very little work on, and it's July and it's really nice outside, my choices there might be very different than how I approach the way that I eat in November when it's snowing outside and I've got lots of training to do and all those things. Like, but if we fix ourselves to one specific rule or one group of rules that aren't adaptable and aren't flexible, we can find maybe 50% of the year, if we're lucky, feeling like a bloody failure versus feeling like, hey, I can change with the times. I can, things will fluctuate and I can fluctuate with them, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's really important to talk about, like the seasons of your life, right? Like whether it's the season like outside, like physical seasons, and you eat a different way because it's cold outside or because it's warm outside. But there are also, like you were just telling me before everybody hopped on here, right? Your brother had a baby. Like the season of life that he is in is going to look a lot different than it did pre-baby, and the way that you eat in that season of life is going to change. So being adaptable and recognizing like, okay, this type of way worked for me then, but my life is different now. So what things are different? How do I need to change them to work for me and the type of things going on in my life now? So that adaptability is going to be really important long term, and changing the way that you think about food is going to affect how adaptable you can be.
Right. And I think what we see is, and the scientific studies kind of tell us, the more rigid we are, and for the longer we're really, really rigid, the less adaptable we become naturally, the more brittle we become in terms of like flexibility around things. And anybody who's ever before maybe not realized, and they've gone out for a meal with a family member, or they've been, they got really hungry whilst they were out and they fell short on choices. It's miserable to feel like you're like, shit, I can only do this one thing. I can only do this thing, and if I can't eat that, then I'm a failure, or I've failed, or I've fallen off the wagon. It doesn't have to look that way. Like, yes, sometimes of the year, same again, like a cyclical nature. Like sometimes of the year, maybe if you're training for a preseason sport, or you have an event coming up where you feel like, I don't know, you have to make weight for a certification, which is something that ends up being the case for my kind of day-to-day. Maybe there's times when we're a little bit more strict with ourselves. And then just like any other time, there's probably more times when I'm a little bit more flexible with myself. Let's say Christmas, we have to be able to understand that everything is cyclical, and we need to be able to ebb and flow with it, because the more rigid we are, the less adaptable we become, the more like we are to break, and when we break, it's not an easy thing to kind of fix, So I think that's a really interesting way to look at like the good and the bad in general. The good is that, I think if we sum this up, like the good is that we know what works. The bad is that we're expected to be that way all the time, and that's not the way the world works.
That's right.
We don't, or maybe we don't explore the things that work for us best in any given time of the year or moment. So, all right, so we'll move on to the last little bit, and I know we're running over time here, but if you're okay to stay, I'm okay to stay.
Okay.
Perfect. So the last little question, the last question that I wanted to discuss today was different approaches for different people, and I guess we're flowing right into it. I kind of gave you talked about three different approaches that I've gone with in the past. How do you approach different people with different approaches, knowing what you know as a nutrition coach?
So, as I've already stated, like I think everybody has to have a different way to eat in order to be successful. Like they have to have their way of eating. And what I do isn't going to work for you, Jay, or like, and that is the key to success. So, but my job as a coach looks the same really no matter who I'm working with. And that's figuring out where they are at, what they're ready for, because some people come in and they're ready to let go of diet culture and like take in some good information and get started on unpacking habits, and other people that's a lot harder for, to challenge their way of thinking. And it is a process. Even people who are further along the line and ready to talk about the uncomfortable stuff and their thought patterns, and they're still going to go backwards sometimes. Even like I do. I'm like, wait, no, I'm not wrong. You know, nobody likes to hear that. Nobody likes to be like, I might be wrong about something, but my job is going to look the same, and it's going to help them figure out what's going to work for them in the moment. So I think like one of the important things that I work with my clients on is understanding what their life looks like and their lifestyle, because that's going to really be a big key. Like if I try and teach somebody how to cook at home and they eat all of their meals out currently, it's not going to work. So like understanding lifestyle habits is going to be really important when I'm working with someone, understanding like what things are important to them. Maybe it's eating out, but maybe it's like, I've tried so many times to give up wine every night, or, you know, insert literally anything, dessert, cheese, and I know it's holding me back, that I can't give it up. And I'm like, well, why do you know that? Like, figure that stuff out, figure out their non-negotiables. I'm not the type of person that wants to give up any food, literally ever. Like, I'm not the person that like cycles through my eating, like cuts back sometimes and like lets myself eat a little bit more other times. Like I like something more steady, more middle all the time, because that works for me. I don't want to give anything up. If you tell me I have to give something up, I'm going to be like, no, absolutely not. And it's not going to work. So understanding that about them, what their non-negotiables are, like I want to be able to eat these certain things, understanding what their lifestyle looks like. That's my job. And then helping them understand how they can work with those things. And instead of looking at it as a limiting factor, oh, well, I don't have time to pack my lunch, so how is this ever going to work for me? There are tons of options if you don't have time to pack your lunch, and I'm here to bring them to you and say, which ones of these are going to work? What can we do to make your life not be something that you look at as a negative impact on your eating habits? Because it's not. It's just different than what I do or what you do.
Right.
So
or what we fantasize as right, or the one way to do it, and if it's not that way, then what we're doing must be wrong, versus it just being, well, maybe just what they're doing doesn't necessarily fit for me, and that's fine. One of the things that I always end up saying to people, like I say it to our staff members, I say it to people on podcasts or like any other fitness professional, like the way we ultimately end up approaching things at our place is that I always say, like, it's not our job to tell people what they currently think about health and fitness is wrong, and that they should believe what I believe in like a dogmatic and zealot-based way, because that's a great way, just like you say, like it's a great way for people to immediately resist, unless they're ready for a complete change and are like, you know what, I'm completely done with things that I've done in the past, I'm looking for the next thing to believe in. You know, if that is the way that if that's the way people typically feel, then all you're doing is drawing them in, and there's a good chance that they're going to be there for a short period of time before the next person says the same thing to them, and they're drawn to that pool or that way of thinking. You know, and I think the concept of there being this one way to do it, and that there can be no flexibility or no customization around like how things fit into your life, is not a dangerous way, but it's just not a useful way of doing things. It doesn't. You're right. It just doesn't work. You know, for fear of using a pun here, like you said, like here's these options, you choose from it. It's a menu, right? Like you go to a place with like, I would probably avoid going to a restaurant that had 1,000 things on their menu. I'd probably avoid going to a restaurant that only had one thing on the menu. But if I had like what I thought was 10 good options that fit me and my appetite choices on a day-to-day basis, that would feel pretty good for me. And I think the way we pose options for change or improvement or ways of working on literally anything, it doesn't have to just be nutrition, but literally anything, if we pose it in like hey, here's a good menu, here's what I've cultivated for you as some good menu of options, where do we want to start? Like, again, it gives the person you're working with the opportunity to choose, and choice is really important. Some people like to be told exactly what to do. You can bet your backside that those people don't do it for very long if they don't feel like they're part of the process, if they don't feel like it was a choice that they made. Because people don't do things that they don't know why they're doing. It just doesn't work for very long, right? You can white knuckle it for only so long. After a while, you're like, I need to get off this roller coaster. So I think that's a great way of putting it, as like, giving people a choice, the options of things to do. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. I think I'm sure we've both run into this archetype of people. What do you do for somebody who is maybe a little bit more data driven and maybe sees value in a big challenge up front straight away, but maybe you have recognized that maybe they're not ready for that challenge? How do you go about balancing those things in a client?
I think it's unfortunate, but this is the way it is. Like, we have to learn things on our own, don't we? Mm-hmm. So I have to be there and support them and let them do it their way and say, this isn't the way that I would necessarily do it, but I'm willing to support you through it.
Right.
And then, it usually doesn't work. And I don't go and say, I told you so, because that's super unhelpful. Nobody likes to hear that. And I wouldn't want to be told that when I have made bad choices for myself, which I certainly have. So I support them through that and say, okay, we'll try this way if you want. And I'll be here for you through it. It's not what I would pick for you, but let's try it, And ultimately, that might be how they learn, this really isn't working for me, or I don't like it. And it lasts for different periods. Some people know right away that it's not going to work for them, and they're like, wow, that sucked, a week later. And some people make it through a month or longer, and then they come to me and like, well, I did that month, and that was great, and they're happy with it, and then they're ready for something new. Because like you said, oftentimes things that are too rigid and things that people didn't have a lot of autonomy in, like they didn't pick it for themselves, it's not going to be something that lasts for long term. And that's my goal with all of my clients is I want you to stop thinking about fitness and nutrition as like a 30-day or a 90-day, or like, I want you to learn skills that you can use literally forever and apply to any portion of your life, any season, good, bad, ugly, and be like, oh, I might not be able to do it exactly the way Eirinn taught me back then 20 years ago, but I have this piece of knowledge that I can apply to this portion of my life now.
Right. Yeah, you're never going to be able to answer all questions, but what you can do is, if you can arm people with, as you said, the autonomy to be able to almost plug and play certain skills into certain scenarios. Like, I usually say to people, like, let's find like 8 to 10 meals that we can kind of rely on. I think the same kind of thing with skills. Let's try and find 8 to 10 skills that we can kind of rely on. See things that, like, you know what, if I feel stressed, I have the option to take a walk, go for a run, go to the gym, take a bath, meditate, go and bake. I have 7 options that I just managed to come up with right there and then to kind of satisfy my needs in that moment. Why can't food be the same way? Why can't training be the same way? Why do we have to look at it in such a rigid fashion that, as you said, kind of leads to this morality of if I do this, I'm bad. If I do this, I'm good. If I fall off, it's not worth doing ever again. If I don't do it absolutely perfectly, and it's also the things that I guess, like, to go right back to the first question, is the things that we're packaged, the things that we are, that's put in front of us that says, you should be able to do this. I think the word should is probably the most useless and unhelpful word in the English language. Like, you should be able to do this. Should is such a precursor to nothing good, I think. But, like you said, like, I should be able to give this food up. If a client comes to you and said, I should be able to do this, well, why should you? What's the contributing factor to that? Why should you be able to do this? Maybe 10 years ago, you could do it, but why is that the same 10 years from now? Like, there's so much more mileage in between you and when you could do this in the past that maybe it just doesn't serve you anymore.
Also, one thing to note there too is, like, a lot of our preconceived notions, like, we might have given something up and seen some sort of result. And how do we really know that those two things are, like, dependent on one another and there weren't other contributing factors? Like, for instance, like, I gave up sweets for 30 days and I lost weight. That was the goal, right? I'm making up a scenario. But that person also made sleep a priority, went to bed at the same time every night, and they got consistent workouts in 3 to 5 days a week. Was it really the sweets that they gave up, or was it the fact that, like, they instituted all these other habits? So looking at those things and saying, well, could there have been other things that contributed, or could that not be true? And thinking about those types of things and challenging your belief system around all of it.
Yeah. It's like, I guess the question is, and I've said it to a few people, is do you believe in magic? And I think the vast majority of people would say no. Some people might say yes, at which point I've kind of shot myself in the foot. But if you believe in magic, great, then I've probably got a different mountain to climb. But if you don't believe in magic, then don't apply magic to nutrition either. You know, if you do a 100 squat challenge, you know, every day for a week, there's nothing magic that's going to come out of that. Yeah, maybe you'll make some incremental changes towards a particular goal, depending on what that is. But you're right, you know, if you give up sweets, a lot of the time when people do a 30-day, you're right, like do a 30-day challenge of some sort, whether they're asked to give up a particular food group, there's a confirmation bias that says, well, you know, I'm giving up sweets, so I may as well also work out every day, get 8 hours of sleep every night, drink all my water, eat all my veggies. Like, I'm making this change, I may as well like kind of add on to it. When really it's the, you know, we should think about it the other way around, which is like giving up sweets is the quite literally the cherry on the cake. What makes up the cake is all these other habitual changes. But maybe we, as this right back to the very start, I think we're fed the Cinderella story, and the Cinderella story is, you know, for want of a better term, it is a story, and it is a fantasy, and it doesn't serve us very well. And so a lot of the, you know, we, as I said earlier on, we know what we know, and there might be some changes to that, but there's been very few changes in knowing what we know. But how we apply what we know individually, person by person, completely different. Like, you know, if Grandma Betty, who's 80, and, you know, little Timmy, who's 20, I know that both of them are going to squat. But how I coach them to squat, and how I tell them, how I ask them to squat, and the setup for that, and all the other individualities that people kind of absolutely love and are drawn towards in training, they reject out of hand when it comes to nutrition. Like, there's this one way of thinking, of doing things, and like, as I said, no other place is it like that outside of health and fitness. There's no other place in the world that kind of feeds us this mentality. So, you know, to parrot what you said before, like challenging the way we think and see about, the way we see and think about health and fitness in general is like, we should be constantly questioning it, because the motives of the way it's packaged to us, I don't trust. Yeah, so I'm cognizant of time here, and I think we've covered a ton of things. You know, I'll put these up in the notes afterwards, and you know, I really appreciate your time doing this, because I think it's actually something that I have a hard time talking about on my own, because I think maybe my preconceptions of thinking about food as an emotion are limited. Like, I'm not super comfortable talking about it as much, and maybe I lean on my scientific knowledge a little bit more, and the interaction, the emotional portion of food is something that I personally need a little bit of help with. So I really appreciate your time talking with us today, because that seems to be, maybe I'm wrong, but that seems to be one of like your biggest skills, and I'm always drawn to your way of thinking because of that. And I would imagine that a lot of other people are as well, because yeah, there's only so much we need to know about nutrition before it's about like making it work for us. Yeah. So thank you a ton. Where can people find you?
Well, thank you for having me on, because you know I love to talk about food. You can find me on my personal Instagram page, Eirinn KC. I gave you the spelling earlier. Yeah. And you can find me on Movement Lab Raleigh. You can find me on my husband's podcast, The Pillars of Health, talking a lot of nutrition stuff. And I have a whole nutrition highlight on my Instagram where I have saved a lot of my rants. So, but like you said, I think you're science driven, and I like the science behind food, but I also love to cook and I love to eat just like anybody. And the way that I coach and the way that I think about food, I would never want to tell someone they should or have to give something up in order to be successful if they love food like me. So that's the way that I try and think about things, and I try and coach people.
Great. Yeah, and I'll link all those things out on our Instagram page, and I'll share it with you as well, all the tags where people can find you. So, and obviously all the information that we've kind of gone over today. So thank you a ton.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm going to hang up with you on Instagram, and then I'll stop recording on Zoom, and then I'll chat to you a little bit on Zoom. Thanks, Eirinn.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everybody, guys. Bye.